So really enjoyed having a conversation with Samuel Huber, founder and CEO of Matera and Landvault today, talking about building the 3D internet. We talk about how the metaverse, whilst the narratives evolved and perhaps the user types evolved in a B2B context, is very much alive and kicking, especially out in the MENA region, in UAE, Saudi Arabia, with a lot of very exciting large-scale public works. We talk about the convergence of generative AI tooling with 3D content and tokenization and blockchains, as well as their latest initiative in SocialFi, layering incentive mechanisms, tokenization, and all the good Web3 stuff on top of the existing Web2 social graph. I really enjoyed talking to Samuel. He's very kind of open, candid about his journey as a founder, the decisions he's had to make, pivots, and of course, how to find the sweet spot of the Web3 narrative to kind of finance operations. So I know you're going to really enjoy this one. Okay, so on the Metaverse show today, really happy to welcome founder and CEO of Matera and Landvault, Samuel Huber. Welcome, Samuel.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Actually, it's been a while since we've directly talked about the Metaverse on the Metaverse show, which is ironic, I guess, because we use it very much as a catch-all for everything Web3 and extending beyond, I guess, what people might think as a kind of more narrow definition of crypto, financial services, DeFi and stuff like that. So it's going to be really interesting to talk to Samuel to understand where the metaverse is in the overall narrative. He's based out in Dubai and reassures me that, or kind of confirms that the metaverse is still big out there, both in a public and private sense. A lot of money is being poured into it, very ambitious projects of which they are kind of central to. As I mentioned at the top, founder and CEO of two entities. The first one is Landvault. We'll get into this a little bit later in the Genesis story, which is very much kind of more of a Web2 proposition. It completed over 100 million square feet of virtual real estate across all different environments, Sandbox, Roblox, and now has a white label solution. And that's been around, since 2018, over 6 years. Matera is the Web3 arm of that proposition, which is building the Web3 creator economy on top of Web2 social networks and content, what would be referred to in a Web3 context as SocialFi. I guess it's going to be interesting to explore is SocialFi and the kind of the shot in the arm that the metaverse needs, the open metaverse needs to kind of be reinvigorated and to kind of fulfill a lot of the promise and hopes that we all had for it, perhaps taking a bit of a backseat in a wider Web3 narrative. Before we do that, I just want to welcome you all to the Metaverse Podcast. And before we get into that discussion, ask a small favor. So if you enjoy the show and the insights that we bring to you, the kind of founder journeys and experiences, please make sure that you subscribe, like, comment, do all of those things. It really kind of helps bump up the distribution of the podcast and get us to reach as many founders as possible to bring them into the world of Web3. Coming back to Samuel, as I said, really a Metaverse OG in 2018, very, very early. Somebody that's approached it pragmatically, going where people are, users are, bringing them experiences that are relevant rather than necessarily shoehorning Web3 into it, but now has this kind of Web3 proposition. There's a timing thing here. So from a founder perspective, really going to be interesting to get your insights as to why now, why you think Web3 is the direction of travel, why Dubai is a good place for you to be as a founder building in that space. But before we do, would be good to get a little bit of background on you as a founder, your founder journey, what brought you to be pioneering these solutions in the context of the metaverse.
Yeah, thank you. I have a pretty non-linear background. I started as an engineer. I studied science, ended up becoming an engineer in the Formula One industry. That was my first job, working for Mercedes and working on engine simulations for Lewis Hamilton at the time, where I was just moving into Mercedes. Very different from what I do today, but I always had this entrepreneurial drive. So I knew that I wouldn't stay very long in corporate. I wanted to work in corporate to see what it was, but at the same time was trying to refine the next steps. And this was 2013, 2014. At the time, I remember looking at, which area is going to be a real big area for growth over the next couple years. I didn't have much of a, B2B experience or any big ideas. I was looking more at a market or trend that I think, would create big opportunities. And I remember looking at mobiles and how content on mobile was changing. There was more and more video networks that were popping up, like Vine, for example. And then games on mobiles were also becoming something that everyone was jumping into. This were the heyday of the App Store, all those tools to push an app online and market your apps. So it really felt to me that 3D content, mainly gaming, it is going to be an entire new market for gaming on mobile. So this is what I decided to focus on. Initially, I basically set up a small studio and was building very, very simple games, which today you would call hyper casual. At the time, it was hyper casual because we didn't really have much of a design team. So we had to do very, very simple graphics, very simple mechanics. So we were forced into that genre of doing things super simple. So we pushed multiple games. The model was trying to grow the game to a certain level by leveraging interesting mechanics in the App Store, like being featured on the app of the day that would give you an insane amount of traffic, and then eventually sell the code of the game on marketplaces. So we're basically flipping games that were doing okay, getting a couple thousand users in 1 or 2 days. We're flipping the code to another developer. So we did that for a while. Then we eventually tried to build our own IP. And this is where I learned how difficult it was for game developers to monetize games. We tried multiple times to create our own economy within the game, which was very, very difficult, and always had to revert back to advertising as a simpler way to monetize your audience. And when we reviewed the type of advertising that was available for mobile games, I remember being really shocked to see that the only thing that worked was those terrible ads that would interrupt the experience, those interstitial, those rewarded ads that would literally cut the game in two. And then you would have to spend time. You can't find the way to close this ad. It just creates a terrible experience. And somehow the worse the experience for the user, the more money we would get. And in my head, this felt like this was just this crazy dilemma. Like I couldn't think of a market that was more inefficient in a way that would create worse experience, but at the same time generate more revenue. And I remember thinking about banking system, for example, and how Revolut, I was based in London at the time, and Revolut was just popping off, and just an app which is pretty much the same, but just a better user experience, a slicker mobile app, and suddenly everyone, and better fees, and everyone moved into Revolut at the time. So it felt to me like the advertising industry somehow hadn't found this moment yet, especially for 3D content, where there had to be a better way. There had to be a better way to align the different stakeholders, the users, the game creators, and the advertisers. So I moved away from that studio eventually and took some of the team with me, actually, and we decided to come up with a monetization solution, which would help content creators, game creators to place advertisement within the game itself, as opposed to interrupting the game with a pop-up. How can we do product placement? And this had never really been cracked at scale. There was a lot of agencies doing that, but no product end-to-end solution was really doing that. So we ended up building that marketplace. And that's the company that started in 2018. So it started more as a gaming monetization company under the name AdMix. We were able to raise a first seed round in 2018 and then Series A in 2020, and quickly onboarded quite a lot of games on one side and advertisers on the other side. So we were very much a marketplace. The game creators could identify space inside the 3D content, like a billboard, for example, or around, imagine in FIFA, you would identify space around the field and you could sell that directly to advertisers in real time. So we built the entire infrastructure, the real-time bidding. We had a whole ad tech infrastructure in a way, and that worked pretty well, although margins were very difficult. They were quite low. And acquiring big game publishers turned out to be a lot more expensive than we expected. They all wanted minimum guarantees. And this is where all the audience is, right? The second tier actually is only a fraction of the audience. And generally, the audience that advertisers want to reach is within the top games. And that turns out to be extremely expensive. So that coincided in 2021 when we raised our Series B, which was about 25 million. We decided we had a couple of months of strategic alignment with my board, where we basically had two options. One was going hard on this ad tech path and put most of the money that we had raised into acquiring a couple of really big games and just in a way hope that advertisers would want that traffic, or we could become a slightly different company. And at the time, it was the time where Facebook rebranding to Meta. And a lot of our clients, which were brands like the Coca-Cola, the Burger King, all these guys, they were asking us for more than just product placement inside games. They wanted their own game, their own experiences. And so we saw that there could be a market there for us to become a bit more creative and more like a metaverse company, I guess you would say, to not just place ads in existing content, but actually own the content in the first place. And so, of course, you can increase your margins this way. The same product placement technology can still work, but at least you also make money by producing the content. And so that's the direction that we ended up going to. And to do that, we acquired a studio that had those capabilities. Studio was called Landvault. They already had a bit of a name for themselves in the Web3 space. We ended up taking their name and then growing from there. And that's just the beginning, because we all know what happened to the Metaverse brand market a year after this acquisition. But I guess this is for the second part of the podcast.
Really interesting to kind of hear how you navigate those inflection points. When you take a material amount of money at a Series B, that's on an understood strategy. So to then be able to work with your board to effectively pivot is not an easy undertaking, right? So that you must have had very high conviction it was the right thing, and presumably a supportive board that kind of help you navigate that. And then, as you say, there was this period, let's call it a couple of years, where the metaverse was really hot. Brands were rushing into the space, both in a Web3 and a Web2 context. Of course, explosive growth from Roblox. And we kind of look between then and now. What's different? What's changed? Are brands still engaging, or are they just engaging differently? How and where is Web3 positioned in all of that? Presumably, the answer to that is the segue into Matera.
I think the market's more normal now than it was at the peak. So, I'm not one of those complaining that the market disappeared. I mean, we literally caught this market towards probably the second part after this acquisition. And we grew from Metaverse revenue from 0 to about 10 million ARR in like 2 or 3 months. So it was pretty crazy. I mean, I have, Fortune 500 companies coming to us on a Monday saying, on Thursday, our CEO is going to announce that we are entering the metaverse. What can you do for Thursday? We don't have anything. And so we literally, it's like 3 days to build the 3D. Like, this doesn't make any sense, right? This is not the sign of a normal market. So we knew that this was, the typical peak of inflated expectations where everyone just jumps in for no reason because the other is jumping in as well. We obviously wrote that, and that's kind of where we made a name for ourselves as the largest builders on the sandbox. We did a lot on Decentraland and those platforms. But at the time, there was no strategy for those brands. There was no why. Like, why do you need to be there? Are your customers even there? Which is kind of the first question that you would ask a brand, right? Their goal is to increase their revenue or target more customers at the end of the day. So this just didn't make much sense at the time. We were trying to help those brands really figure out why they should be there. But there was just this influx of demand. Like, we have to be there. This is marketing, this is positioning. So this is what happened. And then eventually it just kind of slowly, or actually pretty quickly, in less than 2 quarters, we lost, about 70% of that revenue, which was not unexpected. But obviously we had scaled the team to be able to meet that demand. So this is the typical cycle that just happened this way. Luckily, we had one client at the time, which was based in Abu Dhabi. They were one of the first and only client that had a very different outlook to this whole thing, that they basically wanted to build more of a digital twin. And they had this long-term vision that one day, this entire island in Abu Dhabi would have a whole digital twin that could be used for internal purposes, but also for tourism and for all kinds of purposes. We basically followed up with that project, and I came to Dubai a couple times to meet with them and also work with other projects, and realized that this was more of a global, I guess, governmental vision that they had. Everything would be digitalized. The infrastructure would become digitalized. All the infrastructure they have, hotels, parks, real estate, all of that we eventually have a 3D copy of itself that you could use for multi-purposes. And that was actually a project that the government has that is public on their website. There is a Dubai Metaverse strategy. So that felt really interesting to me. And because, there was not much traction elsewhere, I basically had to restructure the company. We went from 160 people to under 100 at that time. Basically moved to Dubai and try to validate my hypothesis that there would be more clients here. And that took about 6 months. This is where we are. And 80% of our revenue comes from the GCC region. Aligning with that strategy, digitalizing infrastructure, building digital twins for ministries of culture in Saudi or huge infrastructure project, real estate projects. It's been a very interesting journey, but I feel that now we really have found a segment of customers that are driven by real reasons. Everyone has pictures of their products or videos of their product. The next step is going to have to be a 3D version of your infrastructure. So if you're building a building, if you're building a new resort or anything in the physical world, it would just be something that you need to have, which is a digital twin, a 3D representation of your infrastructure. And you can then use that for different purposes. You can use that internally for simulations. You can use that for promotion, for tourism, depending on your use case. But it all starts with having a digital copy of your physical infrastructure. We ended up building 4 different products, which we'll talk about, to be able to cater for those clients. Anyway, long story short, the point is the metaverse that we're building today, which we actually don't call metaverse anymore. We call it 3D internet or immersive experiences, is miles away from the vision that Meta and even, the Decentraland of the Sandbox were selling back in the day. It's actually completely different and should not be called the same. It just happens to rely on the same base technology, which is real-time 3D.
I mean, it's really interesting that the region, broadly, whether it's UAE, Saudi, etc., is leading the way here. And I guess that the metaverse or whatever kind of term you want is seen as an extension of other kind of cultural initiatives, tourism initiatives, or kind of economic development. Maybe let's talk about the kind of stack that's come out of this. So, what is Matera? What is its kind of technical stack? Presumably there's services around that technology stack as well, because you're kind of creating white label solutions, right? Is there also a kind of self-service component to that?
The tech stack has 4 components. So it starts with a creation product, which uses generative AI to help build environments faster. We know that one of the big bottlenecks of the metaverse or the 3D internet is how quickly you can build experiences. And now with generative AI, you can build videos and full essays and everything very quickly. The last hurdle is still full-on 3D experiences, which hasn't been fully cracked yet. Of course, we're not competing with OpenAI, by building something really generic. We wanted to build a very specific AI for a specific use case. So what we ended up doing, because we're doing a lot of urban development and real estate projects, is a tool where you can snap pictures of buildings and then the AI transformed the 2D picture into a 3D asset. 70% of the way there. It's not perfect. You have to clean it up a little bit, but it saves you, about 30 times the time that it would take to build it. So something that would take a month, you can now do in a day. And we intend to further increase that efficiency by a factor of 3 or 4x. That's already a big help for those projects. That's the first product. You can go from images or sketches of what you want to build into full 3D assets. You would then assemble those into a game engine. We rely on third-party game engines. We have SDKs for that. And then the second product is an infrastructure deployment platform. So again, we noticed that a lot of our clients, government clients, have those ideas. They often get studios to build environments for them, but then they're not quite sure how to deploy it, how to push it to their customers. We want to focus on a 3D internet that has maximum availability and maximum accessibility. The metaverse or 3D internet, however you want to call it, has to be web-based. Apps is just too much friction for people to install. We know that most people only use like 5 or 6 apps. And so for something that is a short experience of 10, 20 minutes, no one's going to download a dedicated app for that. So it has to work on the web. it has to be a link that you send, just like you send a link to a website. You then open a website that happens to have 3D components. So we build the entire platform to render that on the web and to also deploy that in the right region. If you work with the Ministry of Culture in Saudi, they want the content to be hosted in Saudi, the data to be bound by Saudi law. If you do it in UAE, it's different. So all that infrastructure under the hood, which can take a long time and a lot of DevOps hours to deploy that in a custom way, we can now deploy it in a few minutes through our platform, which is fully self-serve. So you upload your project, you decide where you want to host it, put a couple of parameters in there, and you get a link that you can then immediately play on the web.
Very cool. And this is something we've been talking about for, I don't know, probably 18 months or so, this kind of concept of the 100x creator. So by leveraging generative AI tooling, the kind of production time for games, virtual worlds is significantly decreased. You've kind of taken it one step further, which is rather than just necessarily remixing or rehashing 3D content as an input, you're kind of taking real world objects and turning them into assets. That library just gets bigger and then the AI kind of do its work as well on making that possible. So is that content then reusable if it's tokenized? So it becomes an open library of assets, presuming there's no kind of copywriting?
So we then have the third product, which is monetization analytics. The in-game advertising solution is still very much alive. So the owner of the experience can basically monetize their experience by selling pieces of that real estate to brands and sponsors. And then the fourth product through Matera is the tokenization. And so the tokenization opens a ton of monetization opportunities, from simply minting individual assets as NFTs and locking the IP of the physical building into digital twin, so that when you're browsing this open environment on the web, you can be sure that if the Museum of the Future in Dubai sells you virtual ticket for a virtual tour, you can be sure that this is actually connected to the real Museum of the Future and not just someone that created a perfect copy of it, but that is not affiliated with the real asset. So this is an interesting way for us to link the IP of the physical world and the digital world. And there's also, as you said, the way to then tokenize this IP, making it, an investment potentially. I think tokenization is not an end goal in itself. It's more like an enablement of future monetization. And at the moment, we are still just scratching the surface on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a number of conversations recently around Metaverse IP. So existing IP holders, whether that's in the world of, say, music and entertainment, private equity firms are now, buying back catalogs and rights to particular artists, primarily for streaming income. But actually, there's an argument there that much of that IP might have a metaverse premium, significantly more substantial in the future, about how it's exploited in a virtual context. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch that whole narrative around metaverse IP and how it's priced into the value of IP play out. One of the big criticisms of most virtual worlds, especially the kind of early Web3 environments, were that they were empty. So yes, you can build these beautiful worlds, all these technically brilliant worlds, or these tokenized worlds, these decentralized worlds, whatever the characteristic that kind of made it feel innovative, technically innovative, and yet more often than not, they were empty, unless there was a particular event happening, so it's like very, very kind of temporary populations. How do you solve the challenge of empty worlds, especially when these worlds are being they're white labeled worlds, right? So whilst they're sharing a technology set, presumably they have to build an audience from scratch.
This is a very valid question. I think we aim to solve that problem in different ways. The first way is that when you create a white label experience that clients can actually embed on their existing websites, it's less difficult for them to then drive traffic to it because the traffic is already there. It's on the website. So it's very easy to embed a 3D component within a website where, the client already gets traffic. The problem with destination metaverses, as I call them, which is the Roblox, the Sandbox, and so on, is that it's completely outside of the marketing funnel that the brand or the client has. And so they do need to send users away. They basically dependent on that platform, a little bit like on the App Store for discovery. Even though the underlying platform may be decentralized in a way, it's actually a very centralized way to think about things. Whereas for us, we're more similar to the WordPress of the metaverse in a sense, where you can simply deploy those experiences on your existing properties. It can be your website, it can be your app, where you already have an audience. And it's just much easier to then divert that audience into that 3D experience. It doesn't mean everyone will jump in. They need something to do. That's the number one step, really, the number one rule to get people to do anything. They need to have an incentive. It needs to make sense. They need to have a reason to go there. So the why is very important. This really comes from game design. What is the purpose of that experience and why the client should do that? So we always try to bake exciting things that users cannot do anywhere else. So it really gives them a reason to go through the slightly harder path, which is to open that experience. And generally, there's rewards associated with it as well. So it is a little bit incentivized, but I think, we've shown that with experience, with great IP, easy access, and great game design, you can really get significant amount of people in the experience. It's not always, right? It's not this full type of experience. It is generally geared around events or around a specific activation. And I think until we have continuous activation, continuous events, the traffic in those experiences will be a little bit up and down. But, this is just something that I think is part of the birth of that new media.
So maybe we can just speak a little bit more to the social-fi components. You kind of got this white label solution. You've got a large number of clients using those, be it public or private, as you say, at least for now, quite events driven, primarily because it plays a role within the marketing functions. As you say, there's an activation required. But maybe you could talk a little bit more about how your kind of stack and proposition speaks to the wider social-fi market and I guess creators as well, right? The kind of creator economy.
So the last 2 years, we had the idea that we needed to have this tool as part of Landvault to bring those experiences on chain. This was a requirement from clients. They wanted to be able to mint assets as NFTs, to very quickly create tokens inside their experiences, and all the bells and whistles and the benefit that having experiences, being tokenized and on chain. We basically set out to design an entire solution to do that. And about a year ago, we created a small team, the Matera team, which was highly focused on that. And through a lot of research and also looking at the market and also just market logic and narratives that are hot right now, when you launch a Web3 product, you also have to think about what's going to be the market if we launch a token and all these things. We actually thought that being too tightly close to Metaverse would not be the best idea right now. I think even though our type of Metaverse, the 3D internet immersive experiences, is very much alive in the B2B sense, the narrative for Metaverse in Web3 is definitely not back. And so we didn't want to kind of cut down our chances. And we decided to go from a different positioning. So Matera ended up being, I guess, stripped away or spinned off from Landvault into a different foundation, which is completely independent now. Obviously, Landvault has been funding the research and development, but it's now separate. We actually just raised a round of 3.6 million, which is directly in the token, separated from what we raised on the Landvault side. At the moment, the concept is much simpler and much broader. It's basically a tool to reward creators for the work that they are doing. And we're starting with where most creators are, which is social media. And the tool basically enables you to connect your Web2 social media. So you can log in with X, you can log in with Instagram, in the future with TikTok, YouTube, all of these tools. And based on the engagement that you get on those platforms, you basically get points. And those points will be redeemed into actual cash and rewards in our DeFi ecosystem. In the future, of course, you'll be able to connect to games, metaverse experiences, basically any creator network, which is what I call platform where you have a dynamic of creators and people that consume the content. That would be something that would be able to be incentivized and rewarded by Matera. So it's a very broad kind of loyalty program for all creators out there. We're starting on the social fi side, because we see a big narrative at the moment for this, but it's a much broader vision. And we want that platform to really become a way to incentivize new creators and also rewrite the rules a little bit about who gets to be popular. There'll be interesting staking mechanisms to help launch creators. It's almost like a creator launch pad, as opposed to just relying on closed algorithms that we do not control. So we're very excited about this. We think we can sign up a lot of users very quickly because, again, it's very much like a Web 2.5 type of tool where you can just sign up with an email and your socials, but you benefit from Web3. And to me, that's what Web3 should be. It should be at the service of the user experience, not necessarily just front and center in terms of technology. The technology should just fade in the background.
One thing that's quite consistent, at least it appears to be consistent for you as a founder, is pragmatism. And I really appreciate your kind of candid replies about how you think through positioning. You're right, that one of the challenges for a Web3 founder is, whilst you might have a North Star, which is, in decades, the reality is you have to navigate the wider narratives that are going on in the market in order to unlock capital, achieve adoption, and kind of finance the growth of a network. Overlaying on top of the existing social graph of Web 2 makes a lot of sense there. Samuel, it's been great talking to you. It's great to hear that the metaverse is alive and kicking, at least in B2B context. I know a lot of other founders would have really enjoyed hearing your journey. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.